Hello and welcome to my 8th video on normal maps. In this video I want to introduce you to a nice tool that will help us with normal maps and unwrapping UVs and textures. So this tool right here is called Text Tool. Look in the description to see a download link, to see a link where you can go to this website, and or you can just go to renderhjs.net/texttools. Anyways, here at the top you have a small little animated picture which shows you how you can go ahead and install it. Basically you download it, and it's a .mzp file, and you have 3ds Max open, and you simply drag it into your 3ds Max window, and they will ask you to install it, and you will say yes, and you can start using it. So I'm going to go ahead and start using it now. I've got it set to a button right here, Text Tools. I simply click on this and it appears, and it has a lot of cool options for unwrapping, and I will cover all of the options here at a later time. For now, I just want to focus on two of the things that will be helpful for us in creating the normal maps for this object. And that is the Normalize button right here, Normalize UV shells, and the Pack button. And perhaps also the Sort button. Anyway, so last video I went ahead and unwrapped it, and I gave all the finished objects a checkerboard, a checker texture, to let me know that it's finished. So now it's important for us, we need to go ahead and attach all these objects and set up our final UV map, UV layout. Okay, so one thing that's important for us is you notice how the checkerboard has a different amount of tiling on each object. You can see on this big object it's very large, and on this object the checkers are very small like this. So this is the problem is that it's not normalized, which basically means that they're all over the place in terms of their scale, and we need to go ahead and fix that, because it will really hurt us in our texturing process when we're creating the diffuse map and everything else, and it will also hurt our normal maps if we don't fix this problem. And to illustrate why exactly it's a problem, so here I'm going to select this object. I'm going to go into its unwrap UW modifier, click on edit, and we can see that here are what we made last time. And let me, for example, try selecting this. Okay, so you notice right now that this object here is pretty large. So let me go ahead and apply just this random texture here, a material with a texture, just a galvanized metal texture. And you notice here is the texture. So you notice that it has a lot of resolution to it, resolution and detail. So watch what happens when I scale this downwards. Make it very small. Notice how the texture at the bottom has gotten very blurry. That's because it's only taken up this much of the texture space. If I look at my material, my texture, you can see here is the galvanized metal texture, and so this piece is only using up a very small piece here, so we're only getting this much texture resolution in there, and it makes our texture look very bad and horrible. So let's go ahead and undo and make it go back to its original size, and now you can see there's a lot more resolution and detail here. High resolution textures. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and apply edit poly, and I'm going to go ahead and give them all the same material. First of all, just make it so I'm going to go ahead and clone this off to the side so we can have an original, just so we can have a reference for what it used to be like. And I'm going to go ahead and simply attach, and attach them all together. So this is our low polygon mesh. So if I go to unwrap UVW modifier, you can see it's going to be a huge mess, because all those UV shells are overlapping each other. Alright, and this is where Text Tools comes in handy. First of all, let's go ahead and use the Normalize feature right here. So I'm going to click on normal, this button here, and it's going to go ahead and spend some time fixing that. Alright, so take a look at the texture now. You can see it's pretty much even everywhere. So compare it to this one right here. compared to this one right here where it's all over the place in terms of its scale. And here it's very uniform, and this is exactly why Text Tools is a great tool for unwrapping and creating game resolution meshes. Alright, so that's the first tool right there. But it's still a mess. So the next tool we want to click on is right here. Let's see, pack. It has gone and packed all of our UVs in a nice order. Let me try sort. Okay, so even though none of the UVs are overlapping now. Let's go ahead and check this. Select overlapped faces, and nothing is overlapping because nothing is being selected. If something was overlapping, and if we press Z, it would zoom in directly on that overlapped face. So that's a great way to see. But since I clicked on select overlapped faces and I press Z, and nothing is being zoomed in on, that means nothing is overlapping. Let me go ahead and select inverted faces, and there's no inverted faces. So even though the pack feature is very good, it's not perfect, and it doesn't really give us a perfect result. So we're still going to have to, so I'm going to go ahead and scale it down, and I'm going to make it fit in this box right here, because this is the box that we want it to fit in. So I'm just going to go ahead and scale it and fit it right here in this box. Now, normalizing is a very good first step, but however, in some cases, we want one part of the mesh to be more detailed and have more space here than another part. So remember that the more space a piece takes up here, the more space a UV island has, the more texture you can pack in there, the more details you can put in there. So look at your model and ask yourself, what parts of the model will be most visible? On what part of the model do you want to put the most texture detail in? If you look at a first-person weapon, it's usually facing, it's usually like right here. Let's say it's a right-handed weapon. It's usually right here. So what part of the gun are you looking at most? The left side. So you can dedicate more texture space to the left side of your weapon here, and less to the right side, or the side that you don't look at. So that's something you should keep in mind. If you're working with, like an arm, for example, you want to put most of the detail in the hand and the wrist, and you can put in less detail in the forearm, the elbows, and the bicep area. So it's pretty much just common sense. You want to put more resolution and detail into the parts of the mesh that you're going to look at more. So in this case right here, I need to ask myself, how will this canister be used? So if I'm going to be spending most of the time looking at this part of the canister, I can perhaps dedicate less text resolution to the bottom, where it will be very rarely seen. Okay, so right now it's looking like this, and we might need to move some things around. Alright, so what I'm going to do first of all is that area that will be rarely seen is right here, for example, and I'm going to go ahead and move it out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and move these out of the way as well. And this is a big piece right here. This will also be moved out of the way. And I'll go ahead and move this out of the way. So I'm going to start just by arranging some of the objects. And how much time you spend here also depends on how much time you have in the project. If you're being rushed for time, you might just want to rush through this part as well. So there's a lot of ways you can save space. You can see right here, for example, in the middle, there's a lot of space being wasted, and you can perhaps move another object in there. Like that. So that's one way you can create more space. And then for the second, another layer, I'll go ahead and move these in here. Alright, and I'm going to get these small objects in here as well. And they can pretty much go anywhere. Okay, so now we've got these big three objects to take care of. And I can just move this down here. Let me see. So I might have to do some scaling on this object. So I'm first going to go ahead and move these vertices to the right. Like that. So you notice that these checkers, this checker texture is a little bit stretched. And that's because this UV island, or also known as a UV shell, it might be a little bit too uniform. I might have to use the fourth tool here, the freeform mode, to scale it like this. So notice, so look at this texture right now of this part. And so let's see what happens when I scale it this way. See how it's highly stretched? Now notice what happens when I stretch it open like this. Notice that they look a lot better, a lot more even. So I'm going to go ahead and just move it out here. Okay, so this is one of the main parts of the mesh. So we can't really skimp on this. This has to have a good amount of resolution. So this piece at the bottom, it's not going to be seen as much, so we can maybe make it a little bit smaller. I'm just going to move this stuff out of the way. Don't forget that the rotations in the UV editor are also affected by your angle snap toggle. So you can rotate it by 90 degrees and move it off somewhere. So I've got this piece here. And I can even go ahead and do the same for these pieces here, and just make sure none of the UV shells are outside of the boundaries. Make sure they're all inside. So I'm just going to kind of move things around a bit. It's almost like a game of Tetris, as you're trying to find just some place to put all these shells. Okay, like that. And you can make it a little bit bigger, just to fit in here as much as possible. Alright, we've got one piece to take care of. Okay, so right now there's a problem with the layout in that if we put it here, there's going to be a lot of wasted space here. So we've got to figure out what the best thing to do is. So now we have to ask ourselves, let me go ahead and change the material. So now we have to ask ourselves, which piece do we want to have more detail? I think it's important for these pieces at the top to have a lot of resolution. And now we just need to arrange things until they fit nice and snug in here. As you can see, this UV shell right here is being blocked by the top piece here. So it's not very important for it to have a lot of resolution because it will mostly be blocked. So you can just go ahead, perhaps scale some things. Perhaps make this larger. Actually, let's go ahead and make all of these shapes larger because we have a lot of room here. You can just kind of gently nudge the objects just to pack in that extra little bit of room. Okay. So I'm just going to make sure there's nothing overlapping. Select overlap faces. Oh, there is a little bit of overlap. Okay, so right here there's a little bit of overlap. Let's see. Let's move this here. Okay, so that's it. And inverted faces. Okay, so we're good. Here is our completed UV layout. And now we're ready to go ahead and start the baking process. So at this point you can right click, collapse to. So even though we attached all the objects to set up the final UV map, we can detach the objects because sometimes it's a lot easier to get a good bake when the objects are separate. So what we can do is we can generate separate normal maps and then combine them in a program like Photoshop. So this floating geometry can be a problem to generate good maps. So you can detach them, not as a clone, and you have a much easier time baking them separately. Whenever you have a lot of objects close together, a lot of overlap, a lot of clipping, it's a good idea to bake it separately. And this object right here doesn't even really need to be baked. It's just a cylinder, and there's not really any detail that we can bake into it. For this object, it might be a good idea to leave them as one. So keep in mind that when you bake in a normal map, it's not just about generating lots of detail on the flat parts. So it's not just about generating all this detail into your flat parts. It's also about enhancing the edges. Baking a high polygon mesh into a low polygon mesh through a normal map also makes the edges look a lot smoother, a lot nicer, and gives them a better chance to catch reflections and highlights. So you notice that here we have a lot of geometry that captures a nice smooth edge here. Whereas on the low polygon mesh, we don't have that much geometry here. So we just have a very hard, sharp edge. And a normal map will make this edge a lot smoother. And speaking of normal map, smoothing groups and edges, let's go ahead and fix our smoothing groups beforehand. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a separate. First of all, let's work on our smoothing groups. Let's go ahead and detach this first. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our smoothing groups. First, I'm going to go ahead and then Control A and give it all a smoothing group of 1. So that's going to cover a lot of this area. Now we just need to focus on the hard spots. So I'm going to select this, or let's say this, and this. And remember, as long as they're not connecting, you can give them the same smoothing group. And what I mean by that is, if we give this a smoothing group of, let's say, 2, it's going to smooth all of this out. which we don't need. Remember, if you have a sharp point, you want these parts to have separate smoothing groups. I'll give that 2. I'll select these parts and give that 3. So now you can see that these areas, these sharp areas, have their own smoothing group, so they appear to be completely different. Look at the difference between separate smoothing groups and one smoothing group. See how it looks all blurry and you get these strange effects happening? But now you can eliminate a lot of that by giving them their own separate smoothing groups, and you can see there's a lot less or almost no strange smoothing effects. On this part right here, this is a relatively smooth area, so we don't need to create separate smoothing groups for this area here, because it's not quite that sharp. Although it is a bit sharp here. So there you go. Let's go ahead and create smoothing groups for the other areas as well. I think this area already has good smoothing groups, this object. Okay. So I think everything else already has good smoothing groups set up. So now it's just a matter of baking in the detail. Thank you for watching and take care.